Subscribe, click the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. The words hit me before I even fully understood them. My sister laughed, sharp and cold, standing across the room. "You're still so poor," she said, not joking, not teasing. Full on, public, aimed to humiliate me in front of everyone. The air seemed to freeze. My heart thudded like it might jump out of my chest. I had been standing in the middle of our family living room for less than 5 minutes. The smell of fresh bread and roasted chicken hung in the air. The sun streamed through the windows, lighting the polished hardwood floors. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday family gathering, but in that instant, normal didn't exist anymore. I looked at my parents. They were quiet, their eyes flicking between us like they were trying to find the right words, but couldn't. My brother shifted uncomfortably behind the couch. No one spoke. Everyone waited. And I realized, painfully, that my sister had always held this power, the power to make me feel small, even when I had worked so hard to rise above it. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something clever, something that would prove her wrong, but my voice caught in my throat. I had been away for years, building a life, making my way in a world that didn't make it easy. I had grown. I had accomplished things that she couldn't even imagine, yet here I was, reduced to the same shaky, insecure version of myself I had once been in high school. The room felt too tight. The walls seemed to close in. I could see the smirk on her face, the satisfaction in the way she waited for me to crumble. My mind raced. Seconds before, everything seemed ordinary. Laughter, the clinking of cutlery, casual chatter. And now, the betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud. The past I thought I'd left behind felt sharp and immediate. I tried to mask it, tried to smile. "I've done okay," I said carefully, my voice steady but brittle. "I'm glad to be back home." My words were true, but they were not enough. Not for her, not for anyone in that room who had been silently judging, waiting to see how I'd react. She laughed again, this time softer, almost smug. "Okay, that's it? You've been away all this time and this is all you've got?" Her words were light, but each syllable carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken insults. It wasn't just money or status she was mocking, it was my entire journey, every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment I had pushed myself to grow while she sat comfortably judging from the sidelines. I felt a rush of heat to my face, a mix of anger and shame. But beneath it all was a strange, calm resolve that surprised me. She could throw words, try to make me feel small, but I had learned something important over the years. Words can wound, but they cannot define me. Not anymore. I stepped back, letting the tension stretch the room. My eyes caught the sunlight through the window, reflecting off the garden outside. I could hear the faint hum of something in the distance, a sound I didn't recognize at first. My gaze lifted. The sky was streaked with orange, pink, and gold. The calm before sunset felt surreal, a stark contrast to the storm my sister had just unleashed. And then I saw it. Something impossible. A sleek shape appeared in the sky. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but no. The sound grew louder, steady, and commanding, cutting through the tension in the air. A helicopter hovered above the garden. Its blades sliced through the golden evening light, landing with precise authority at the edge of our backyard. The room fell silent. The murmurs stopped. My sister's eyes widened. My parents froze. My brother's jaw dropped. Even the family dog, normally oblivious, tilted its head, sensing the shift. The helicopter was more than a machine. It was a statement, a disruption, a promise of change. I didn't need to say anything. I just stood there, letting the hum of the rotors wash over me. My chest was still racing, but the anger had shifted. This wasn't about making her pay in words. This was about letting life, my life, speak for itself. Every effort, every sacrifice, every long night that she never noticed, all of it culminated in this quiet, undeniable truth. She looked at me, finally seeing me in a way she hadn't before. I wasn't the timid, unsure person she thought I was. I wasn't someone she could mock without consequence. The smirk faltered. Surprise, confusion, and something like awe crossed her face. For the first time, she understood that some victories aren't loud. They don't need to be. They simply arrive. I stepped toward the sliding doors, the sunlight glinting off my face. And just like that, the world had shifted. Nothing was the same anymore. The betrayal had been exposed. The mockery had been answered. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of who I had become. And as I opened the door to step outside, the helicopter waiting, the moment hung in the air, a promise of payback, of truth, of recognition that couldn't be ignored. The story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hum of the helicopter faded into the background, but my mind refused to let go. Standing in the garden, I realized the moment wasn't just about her words or the arrival of something grand. It was about everything I had lost. Everything that had been quietly slipping away, unnoticed, for years. I remembered a day long ago, one that had seemed ordinary at the time. I was sitting in this very living room, younger, hopeful. My sister had barged in with her friends, laughing loudly. "Look at you," she said, smirking. "Still reading your silly books? Still dreaming?" I had smiled politely, trying to match her energy, but inside, a small part of me had curled up in shame. Her approval had always felt like a moving target, impossible to reach. I could still hear my mother's voice from that day. "Just ignore her. You know she doesn't mean it," she had said softly, brushing a hand over my shoulder. But I knew it wasn't that simple. It never was. Her words stuck in my mind, layering over the years, shaping the way I saw myself. Then there were the childhood birthdays. I remembered one in particular. I had been saving for weeks to buy a gift for my sister, thinking it would make her smile. I had wrapped it carefully, using the paper I loved most, and placed it on the table. Later, I overheard her whispering to a friend, "He's so silly, always trying to impress me. Pathetic." The words were whispered, yes, but the sting lasted decades. I had walked into that kitchen, a small, hopeful child, and left feeling invisible. The losses weren't dramatic. No one had stolen anything tangible. What I had lost was trust, the belief that my family could see me as I truly was. I had lost the sense of security in being accepted, the warmth of being understood. Every shared meal, every holiday gathering, had a quiet edge. I had learned to hide, to shrink, to avoid the sting of judgment. I shook my head, letting the memories come and go. There were flashes of happier times, too. My sister and I had laughed together once, running through the park in summer, ice cream dripping down our hands. But those moments were brief, fleeting, swallowed by the long stretches of silent comparisons and unspoken disappointment. I caught sight of her in the doorway, hesitating, unsure how to respond to the unexpected scene. The helicopter still rested in the backyard, its presence demanding attention. She had always seen me as small, unworthy, invisible. But now, somehow, the world had shifted. I remembered the day I had left. I had hugged my mother tightly at the airport, whispered to my father that I would make them proud. My sister had waved casually from across the terminal, barely looking my way. "Don't trip over yourself," she had said lightly. And for years, I had carried that offhand comment like a weight, like it defined me. And yet, in all that time, I had learned. I had grown stronger in ways she could have never imagined. I had taken the things I could control, my work, my skills, my choices, and turned them into something undeniable. But the memories lingered, unshakable. Each success felt slightly hollow without the recognition I had longed for. Each victory quietly tinged with the absence of her respect. I walked closer to the house, the garden sunlight warming my back. I could see my parents exchanging glances, unspoken words between them. I realized then that this wasn't just about her. It had never been entirely about her. Family dynamics were messy, complicated, layered with misunderstandings, with roles that were learned as children and carried through adulthood. And then I noticed something else, a photo, tucked at the corner of the mantelpiece, half hidden behind a vase of flowers. I walked over, curiosity piqued. It was from years ago, a family picnic. Everyone was smiling, younger versions of ourselves. But what caught my eye was her expression. My sister's face wasn't smug or critical in this photo. It was gentle, almost protective, almost proud. For a moment, the past shifted in my mind. I had believed her disdain had always been absolute, that it had been nothing but cruelty. But this photo suggested something more complicated. Perhaps there had been moments when she cared, when she wanted to be close but didn't know how. Perhaps her laughter, her teasing, had always been a mask, fear showing vulnerability, or a way to keep her own insecurities hidden. The revelation didn't erase the hurt. It didn't make the years of subtle dismissal disappear, but it changed the narrative. The betrayal wasn't black and white. It was layered, human. And for the first time, I could imagine seeing her not just as an adversary, but as someone who had been trying and failing in her own way to navigate life and family. I walked back toward the garden, toward the helicopter, and toward the moment that had brought me here. My sister was still watching, uncertain. The shift inside me was quiet, but it was profound. This wasn't about revenge in the way I had imagined. It was about understanding, about stepping into my own power and letting life reveal the truth for both of us. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years and the lift of a new clarity at the same time. The past was tangled, complicated, sometimes unfair. But now, standing in the golden evening light, I felt the edges of the story start to straighten. And then, just as I was about to step forward, my hand brushed against the corner of the photo frame. There was something tucked behind it, a folded envelope, old and yellowed with age. My name was written in my mother's careful handwriting. I froze. The discovery promised answers. The discovery promised clarity. And most of all, it promised that the story I thought I knew might have only just begun. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Its paper was thin and worn, corners curled from time, but the weight wasn't in the paper. It was in the promise it carried. I didn't open it immediately. I let the moment sink in, letting the memory of her laughter, the sting of years, and the clarity of my journey converge into something sharp and focused. Standing in the garden, I looked around. The helicopter still rested at the edge of the lawn, a quiet spectacle that made the family pause. My sister hovered in the doorway, shifting her weight, eyes darting toward me and back at the machine. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I could feel the curiosity, the confusion, the faint crack in her confident front. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and took a slow breath. There was no rush, no showy declaration. I had learned that true strength doesn't demand attention. It gathers quietly, gathers firmly, and waits for the right moment. I had felt small for too long, shaped by other people's judgments and expectations. Now, for the first time, I understood that my actions could carry more weight than words ever could. Back inside, the house seemed smaller, familiar in the way it always had been, yet completely different. I walked through the rooms, noticing details I hadn't before. The way the sunlight hit the floor in the morning, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the staircase. Every little thing reminded me that home was still mine, even if it had once felt alien. I paused in front of the living room mirror, catching my reflection. The person looking back wasn't the timid, cautious version I remembered from years past. The lines of tension in my face had softened, replaced by a calm determination. My shoulders felt broader, my chest steadier. Pain had forged something stronger in me. Not bitterness, not anger, but clarity. Later, as the family gathered for tea, my sister tried to slip back into her usual rhythm, chatting lightly, attempting to reclaim the control of the room with small jokes. But something had shifted. I noticed the subtle hesitation in her voice, the flicker of uncertainty when she glanced at me. She hadn't realized it yet, but I had started to move in a way that was deliberate, thoughtful, and quiet. "Would you like some more tea?" I asked, setting the tray down. My voice was even, calm, welcoming. She nodded, caught off guard by the tone. She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a small victory, almost imperceptible, yet it felt significant. That night, I went to my old study, a room I had neglected since moving away. Dust coated the shelves, and sunlight spilled through the blinds in golden stripes. I pulled the envelope from my pocket. Inside was a note in my mother's handwriting. The message was simple, yet it carried decades of unspoken truth. Remember who you are. Trust your instincts. Some things will make sense when the time is right. I read it twice, slowly. The words were gentle, almost a whisper, but they sparked a fire I hadn't realized I still carried. Trust my instincts. Let the time reveal what was hidden. There was no instruction for vengeance, no call for confrontation, just the quiet knowledge that the path forward required patience, intelligence, and self-respect. Over the next few days, I moved with purpose. Not in grand gestures, not in flashy displays, but in subtle shifts. I listened more closely to conversations, noticed patterns, and allowed the smallest hints to guide me. I offered kindness where it wasn't expected. I spoke with authority where hesitation had once ruled. Each interaction was deliberate, a quiet balance of truth and presence. My sister began to notice the changes, though she didn't know exactly what to call them. Her smirks became uncertain, her comments lighter, tinged with curiosity rather than scorn. She tried to gauge me, to find the old version she could tease and manipulate. But the version of me that returned home was no longer the same. I had learned to stand in my own light without pushing anyone down. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn rose and amber, my eyes caught a small detail. The way she glanced toward the helicopter pad in the backyard, her expression unreadable. She had sensed something different, a shift in the air, in me, in the balance of what she thought she knew. I didn't need to confront her yet. I didn't need to announce anything. The tension was enough. Subtle but palpable, she was beginning to understand that her words alone no longer had power over me. And as I watched her hesitate, I realized that this was the point where justice didn't have to be loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, measured, inevitable. I leaned back in my chair, the envelope still in my pocket, and let the moment stretch. The sun dipped below the horizon, spilling light across the lawn. Shadows lengthened. The air was charged with anticipation. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. I had begun to act thoughtfully, morally, intelligently, not to harm her, but to restore the balance that had long been missing. And as I glanced at her one more time, I saw the flicker of doubt, the first hint that she sensed what was coming. The story was shifting. The quiet justice had begun. And for the first time, I felt that the path ahead was mine to walk, not defined by her laughter, not by past betrayals, but the steady, purposeful steps I was taking toward truth and recognition. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, catching the steam rising from mugs of tea. I found my sister, sitting at the table, scrolling her phone. Her usual confidence seemed fragile, like a carefully balanced object that could topple with the slightest nudge. I approached quietly. No sudden gestures, no angry words, just calm, purposeful, the kind of presence that fills a room without demanding attention. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to be there. "Good morning," I said simply. "Morning," she replied, voice lighter than usual, almost hesitant. I set down my mug and let a silence stretch between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. Not entirely. It was heavy with meaning, filled with all the years of tension, all the small betrayals that had gone unnoticed until now. "I want to talk," I said finally. Her eyes flicked up to me, uncertain. "About what?" "About us. About the past. About what's been left unsaid." She swallowed and looked down. I could see the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her fingers fiddled with the edge of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. This was about quiet power, not loud words. "I've thought a lot since I came home, about how things used to be, about how you treated me, how I felt." She nodded slowly, looking at the floor. Maybe I didn't realize. I didn't know what I was doing," she said, voice small, almost fragile. "You didn't know?" I asked gently. "Or you didn't care?" She flinched at the question. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected, regret. Her voice dropped even lower. I guess I cared in my own way. I just didn't know how to show it. And maybe I thought making fun of you was easier than facing my own mistakes." Her honesty hit harder than any insult ever could. Pain, pride, and fear had been hiding behind every word, every laugh. And now, standing there, facing her, I realized that much of what had been lost wasn't just mine. It was hers, too. I nodded slowly, letting her words settle in the air between us. "I see that now," I said. "And I've thought about what I lost. Trust, confidence, closeness. But I've also learned something important. My life, my growth, isn't defined by the way others see me. It's defined by the choices I make and the effort I put in." She looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time without a smirk or edge. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable. I never realized it felt like that for you," she admitted. I thought I was joking. I thought you'd shrug it off. You'd be surprised what sticks. Words are powerful, but they're not the end. They're just part of the story." There was another pause, a moment suspended in sunlight and quiet understanding. I could feel the weight of years. The years that had made both of us who we were. Pain, missteps, unspoken regrets. They all lingered, but now they could be acknowledged. "I'm sorry," she said finally, the words raw but sincere. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize how much it hurt." "I know. And I've stopped expecting things to be perfect. I've learned to stand on my own, to find balance in my life, regardless of how others act. That's the kind of justice I needed, not to punish you, but to reclaim myself." Her lips pressed together and she nodded slowly. I could see the shift happening. She was beginning to understand, not only that she had been wrong, but that the story of who we were together had changed. And it wasn't just about past mistakes anymore. It was about recognition, respect, and the quiet power that comes from rising above. I leaned back slightly, letting the calm fill the room. "I hope you can see me differently now," I said. Not smaller, not weaker, but someone who grew through it all. Someone who still cares enough to have this conversation instead of holding on to anger. Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment, I saw the sister I had once hoped she could be. The one who cared. The one capable of pride without envy, of laughter without cruelty. "I think I'm starting to," she said. "I've been so blind." That's when I noticed it, the subtle change in her posture, the way her hands rested on the table, the way she no longer carried the weight of superiority. For the first time in years, she was meeting me as an equal, not defeated, not humiliated, just seeing me. And that was more powerful than any demonstration I could have made. The light in the room shifted as the sun climbed higher, casting long golden stripes across the kitchen floor. I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction, not from proving her wrong, but from revealing the truth in a way that allowed both of us to feel it. The tension in the house had changed. The balance had shifted. And then, as we sat there in the quiet morning light, I noticed her glance toward the backyard. The helicopter, still parked, gleamed in the sunlight. She paused, a trace of recognition crossing her face. For the first time, she began to sense that the life I had built, the path I had taken, and the patience I had cultivated were all part of something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. She was beginning to understand. And in that realization, the story turned. The betrayal had been confronted, not with anger or vengeance, but with clarity and strength. The room, the house, and our hearts felt lighter. The past was acknowledged, the present was changing, and the future, whatever it held, was wide open. The morning light streamed through the living room windows, soft and golden, catching dust in the quiet air. I sat across from my sister, still feeling the weight of the conversation from yesterday. The calm tension between us wasn't gone. It had shifted into something sharper, clearer. We were no longer children. We were not defined by the past. Yet the past had one last secret to reveal. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope my mother had left behind. I unfolded the letter carefully, my eyes scanning the words that had been hidden for so long. My sister leaned closer, curiosity flickering across her face, unspoken but unavoidable. "It's from Mom," I said softly. "She left it years ago. I think it explains a lot." Her eyes widened. "Explain what?" I took a deep breath. "Why things were the way they were. Why you acted like you did." She hesitated, and I could feel the old tension rise slightly. But I didn't rush. I let her watch me, letting the calm in my posture speak louder than any accusation. The letter revealed truths I hadn't suspected. My sister had carried burdens I hadn't known about. Our parents' expectations had weighed on her in ways I had only seen through her actions, not understood fully. She had struggled with insecurity, comparing herself to me, fearing failure and ridicule. And in that fear, she had lashed out. Words she had meant as jokes were actually armor, protection from the vulnerability she couldn't admit, even to herself. I didn't know," she whispered, voice small, raw. "I never realized how much your words hurt you." I nodded slowly. "I know you didn't. And part of me always wondered if you even cared. But the truth, the full truth, it matters more than anything else. You weren't cruel without reason. You were scared. You felt trapped." Her eyes glistened. "Trapped? I thought I was just joking like everyone else did." "You weren't joking to me, and that made all the difference. But hearing this,
Understanding it, it changes things. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives me a choice about the future. I paused, letting the words settle between us. The letter had been a key, unlocking not only her motives, but also my own feelings, the anger, the humiliation, the quiet longing for respect. All of it had a place now. But more than that, it gave me perspective. I could see her fear, I could see her regret, and I could see my own path forward. She reached out, hesitating, then pulled back. "I don't know how to make this right," she said softly. I looked at her. "You don't have to do anything dramatic. You just need to understand that words have weight, that actions matter, and that we can still choose how to act moving forward." Her lips trembled, and I realized she was beginning to understand the impact of her years of mockery. The realization wasn't violent. It wasn't a punishment. It was the quiet acknowledgement of consequences, the natural, inevitable consequences of what had been said and left unsaid. I leaned back in my chair, letting the calm settle over both of us. The choice before me was clear. I could continue to hold on to the small resentment, let it fester quietly and shape my actions in subtle ways, or I could forgive, not for her, but for myself, and allow the story to shift into a more balanced, honest place. You have a choice. I have a choice. I can let the past define me, or I can define myself. And that choice, it changes everything. Her eyes searched mine, looking for judgment, for reproach, for the old version of me that would have snapped or lashed back. But that version was gone. I felt the weight of all my experiences, all my growth settle into a quiet clarity. I could still act with pride, with integrity, without letting bitterness guide me. She nodded slowly, and I saw a flicker of relief. Not complete relief. This wasn't a moment of perfection, but a recognition that the story wasn't over. The past had been revealed, the consequences had been felt, and now the future depended on the choices we both made. I stood and walked to the window, letting the sunlight wash over my face. The helicopter rested silently in the backyard, a symbol not of triumph over her, but of the life I had built, despite everything. It didn't need to shout. It didn't need to demand attention. It simply existed, quietly, as proof of persistence, effort, and moral balance. She remained seated, thoughtful, eyes tracing the lines of sunlight across the floor. I could feel her understanding growing, a subtle shift in her perception. She had glimpsed the full truth, and in that moment, I realized my choice was more personal. It was moral. It was the decision to rise, to forgive, and to allow the story to shift into a more balanced, honest place. And yet, the final act hadn't arrived. The choice still hung in the air. Would I offer the bridge fully, extend the hand of reconciliation, or keep the lesson close, letting it settle in silence? The letter had revealed everything, but the answer, the decision that would define the next chapter, was mine to make. I turned slightly, catching her gaze again. Her expression held all the raw emotion of the past years, guilt, regret, hope, and fear. And in that unspoken moment, the story paused. Everything had been revealed, yet nothing was decided. The quiet tension filled the room. The air held both possibility and anticipation. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past balanced by the power of choice. The story wasn't over. Not yet.
The morning sun rose slowly over the garden, golden light spilling across the lawn and glinting off the helicopter resting quietly at the edge. I stood at the sliding door, looking out, feeling the calm settle over me. The letter had revealed the truth. The conversations had uncovered the hidden layers. And now finally, there was a space to breathe, to let everything rest. I turned back to my sister. She sat quietly at the table, her hands wrapped around her nonog, eyes tracing the lines of sunlight across the floor. The tension between us, so heavy for years, had shifted into something gentler, something that felt like possibility. No smirks, no judgment, just presence. "I've made my choice," I said softly. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of balance, out of respect for myself and for the truth. Her eyes lifted slowly, searching mine. There was curiosity there, and something softer. Relief? Maybe even hope. I understand," she whispered. "I don't know how to fix the past, but I want to try." I nodded. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what comes next. That's the part that matters. For a long moment, we simply sat in silence, letting the weight of unspoken years drift away. I realized that closure wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate, and rooted in understanding. The power wasn't in proving her wrong. The power was in reclaiming myself, in allowing truth to stand without distortion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope my mother had left behind. I held it between us, a small, symbolic gesture. I said, "This is what brought clarity." It reminded me that the truth matters more than words, more than pride, more than old grievances. And I wanted you to see it too. She took the envelope carefully, her fingers brushing mine for a brief moment. It was a small gesture, but it spoke louder than any apology could. She opened it slowly, reading the words she had seen before, now through a lens of understanding and shared experience. I watched her face soften, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You were always stronger than I realized," she said finally, voice almost a whisper. "I can see it now, and I'm proud of you." Her words hit me differently than any mockery had ever done. Not because they elevated me, but because they carried honesty, recognition, and a sense of connection we had both missed for years. I smiled gently. "And I can see you now, too. Not just the sister I thought I knew, but the person you've become. We've both grown." We lingered in that quiet moment, letting the sunlight warm the space between us. Outside, the helicopter remained still, a silent witness to the journey that had brought us here. But it was no longer a symbol of triumph over someone else. It was a reminder of effort, patience, and the quiet victories that life allows when patience and integrity guide our actions. I stepped closer to my sister, placing a hand lightly on the table. I said, "It's okay to let go, to leave the past where it belongs. We can carry lessons forward, but not the weight of old mistakes." She nodded, and a small, genuine smile appeared, the kind that reaches the eyes. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fleeting. It was real. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being patient, for not giving up." I felt a calm settle deep inside me, a sense of quiet justice that needed no announcement. The world hadn't shifted dramatically. There were no fireworks, no sudden triumph. But in this small room, in this shared understanding of truth, balance had been restored. Pain had been acknowledged. Understanding had been earned. I went to the window and watched the garden. The sun had climbed higher, illuminating the edges of every tree and flower. The moment felt symbolic, like a painting. Golden light, still air, and two people standing at the edge of something new. Life had a way of giving back quietly, subtly, in ways that didn't need to be loud to be profound. I turned back to my sister. I said, "I think this is where we start. Not from zero, not forgetting, but from understanding, from respect, from choosing to see each other as we really are." Her eyes shimmered with something I hadn't seen in years: hope, clarity, and a readiness to move forward. She nodded slowly. I want that too." I felt a final weight lift, a soft exhale from years of quiet tension. The past was acknowledged. The truth was revealed. And now the future stretched before us, balanced, honest, and open. I picked up a small pen from the table and wrote a simple note on a scrap of paper. Truth matters. Balance matters. Love endures. I folded it carefully and placed it in the envelope, a small, symbolic symbol of what had been achieved, not victory over someone else, but the victory of integrity and understanding. As I stepped back and let the moment linger, I felt the room settle around us. Sunlight, warmth, recognition, all in harmony. The helicopter gleamed outside, a silent monument to effort, patience, and the life I had built. But more than that, it was a reminder that closure and justice often arrive quietly, without spectacle, and always with dignity. I turned to my sister one last time, and I said, "We found our way. And I think that's enough." She smiled, small and genuine, and for the first time in years, we were simply two people standing together. No mockery, no judgment, just understanding. And in that stillness, I realized the truth that would stay with me forever. Sometimes the most powerful victories aren't loud. They are quiet, deliberate, and carried in the heart. The sun dipped slowly through the garden, casting long golden shadows. And in that light, the story finally felt complete. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life love and emotional stories. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. P.